Thanks a lot, guys, for sitting down to talk with us. Frank O'Connor, if you want to start up and maybe kind of explain to our readers kind of your background before 343.
So I've worked on Halo games since the middle of Halo 2. I left a career in journalism to go work on community and writing at Bungie, and got in there just as we'd kind of reset and restarted development on Halo 2. I had a hiccup in the middle, and I got there just in time for that drama. But it was really excellent experience to see how the team came together and refocused and built something really, really cool. I mean, Halo was big, but Halo 2 was, I think, when it went mainstream. And just being there for the Midnight Madness launch events and seeing it turn into a real cultural phenomenon was a pretty exciting experience. And I worked at Bungie all the way up until Halo Reach and through about half of that project. And then as Bungie spun out, I realized that my interest lay with the franchise rather than a specific studio. And so I followed Halo back over to the Microsoft side of the fence, although of course Bungie had been 100% a Microsoft studio up until that point. But it was just that Halo was my passion and the thing I wanted to follow for this part of my career.
Bonnie, I understand that you were at Microsoft before becoming a general manager here at 343.
Yeah, I've been at Microsoft a long time, a really long time. I've been in the industry about 16 years, and all of that's been in Microsoft Studios. I started in sports games, and then ran a casual group doing Zoo Tycoon, working with Alexei Pajanoff on like Pandora's Box and all that, and then moved to Core with like Counter-Strike and Gears, and eventually was the director of production for all the MGS games, including Bungie's games. I'm working sort of at a senior management level, so I had the opportunity to work on Halo 3. And when we spun Bungie out, I just happened to be first in line and had a great opportunity to take it over. So super lucky, and really happy that right place, right time.
Frank, you had mentioned yesterday at the panel that that you had kind of been tasked with building out the full 3-4 team. Can you kind of talk about that early time when Microsoft kind of made the decision to create 343? And
I took 2 weeks to go and read the rest of the books. I'd read Fall of Reach, and then I essentially mapped a timeline out of all the fictional, like First Contact, John's Abduction, Spartan 2 program, and essentially kind of geeked out and fell in love with the universe and realized that 1, 2, and 3 were just the beginning. And I went back to Shane and said I'd take it over under 2 conditions. 1, that we got to build an internal studio, and 2, that everything would be in 343, consumer products, licensing, books, because I felt like it was pretty important to have that cohesive story. And during the process of sort of thinking about, like looking at that timeline and wanting to bound the universe, like what's the first story we ever want to tell, what's the last story we ever want to tell, is when Frank contacted me and essentially said that would be his dream to really formally, it's not that we were really saying what the first story is, but kind of defining that sandbox. And Frank came over and he's been instrumental in pretty much laying the foundation over the last 2.5 years, and everywhere we're going forward is under work that he's done. And from Frank, we basically started amassing a team of what we're now 200. I think that it's been pretty challenging to get the level of talent that we want, especially in the beginning when we couldn't talk about that we were working on Halo 4. But having Frank on and then getting a few other key, getting Kenneth Scott, getting Tajin, talent and passion attracts talent. So just then started building the rest of the team.
Frank, can you kind of talk about the early days when you first kind of approached Bonnie, and just kind of where you guys start, like from ground zero?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I was at Bungie at the time, obviously, and we were a few months into our singlehood, right? And the contracts were still being ironed out, and was still kind of in a spin-off phase. And probably like a lot of people in the studio, I was curious and interested to see what kind of people were going to be taking over the reins of this franchise after we let it go reluctantly, in my case. And I met Bonnie and the team, and there was actually a small core group of people, many of whom are actually still closely involved with the studio or in the studio right now. And she was working with a group called Starlight Runner, who create kind of story Bibles and work on story Bibles for movies. They were working on Avatar at the time, and Bonnie likes to point out that at the time Avatar looked like it was going to be a train wreck. And so in their publicity, they're like, "Can we say we're working with you guys?" And they're like, "You can if you don't mention Avatar." So, but they were creating kind of a franchise Bible and helping the seed of this studio get started. So I was working with those guys to help a nice smooth transition and give them as much of our muscle memory and our sort of tribal knowledge as we could share about the Halo universe and what makes it tick, and what are the story principles that people enjoy, and what are the universe principles that people are attracted to. And I realized just from talking to Bonnie and the other guys that this was a team who, they weren't here to take over a business. They were here to sort of embrace a universe and immerse themselves in it every bit as much as we were. And in a weird way, in some ways kind of more, because this was now a team who was coalescing around the idea of just Halo, rather than coalescing around a small startup developer or a team that's been rolling for 20 years. This was a team whose single focus and passion and career interest was Halo specifically. And we'll see how that works out when we launch Halo 4. But it's a pretty unique thing to get 200 world-class developers in orbit around this one single idea that they are all crazy passionate about. I mean, everyone in there has played Halo for the same 10 years that we have, and has had that kind of communal experience and that shared passion for 10 years. And it's going to be really exciting to see how that benefits us as we climb towards Halo 4.
Obviously, some earlier on projects that you guys had were Waypoint and Legends, the movie. How did those early kind of goals and rollouts before, when Bungie was still working on ODST and Reach, like, how did you guys come up with these kind of projects that you could do to really fire up the team and get them working on things?
We initially, the first team that we built, besides Frank's team, was a publishing team, because at the time Ensemble was doing Halo Wars, Bungie was working on ODST and Reach. And when Frank and I sat down for Legends specifically, with ODST, Halo Wars, and with Reach, there was no Master Chief. And it was the first time we'd ever told a story without Master Chief. And so we really felt that we needed to kind of deepen the foundation of the other characters, the ODST Spartans that are not Master Chief. And that's kind of, and I think that's pretty much the inception of Legends. And I mean, you could probably give more. I know that we all were interested in anime as well.
It was actually kind of a snowballing of an old project and a tradition that Bungie had always had, and that our licensing and merchandising team, which was always based over at Microsoft, had always had, which is that the Halo universe can bear a lot of interpretation, and it bears that interpretation through really successful novels. I mean, 6 of 8 have been New York Times bestsellers. The comic books have been great sellers. The graphic novel was a big deal. And the thing that they all shared in common was different artists were interpreting it. And we'd wanted to make a Halo anime back in the Bungie days for years. There was a group of anime fans back at Bungie always wanted to do that. And we had the bandwidth and we had the resources and we were able to get it started. But in many ways it was a really conventional extension of things that we'd already done in the universe many, many times before, and it was just a slightly larger scale than most of those other projects. And Waypoint was a natural outgrowing of, we knew we were eventually going to have to take over kind of the BNet functionality, the Bungie Net community and stats and universe immersion functionality somehow. And so obviously we had to build a website, but we decided it would be really interesting to see if we could extend that out into the console experience as well. And that's been really cool. It's given us a lot of opportunities to reach people that otherwise would never think about heading off from their game experience to a fairly tangential web experience, or didn't care about their stats enough to go see BNet in the first place. So we've not only been able to reach a lot of customers, we've been able to reach a new type of customer who preferred to stay focused on their console, at their TV, and in that experience.
Well, one thing I've always been curious about is the basically that transition time where there was the finishing up of Halo 3 and that ending with Master Chief. And then as far as Bungie, the remaining Halo games, as you said, no Master Chief, and now they're kind of firing up with 343. How did that all arrange? I mean, was it kind of a big discussion with Bungie and Microsoft, like, this is the direction we want to go, or did you guys prefer to hold off on Master Chief for a while, or how did that all
from a story
come together?
perspective?
Yeah,
Microsoft's always very, very respectful of its first and third party developers, and at no point does Microsoft ever come in and say, "Oh, you've got to tell a Chief story," or "Don't do the Chief for holding it for this." I mean, it just didn't work like that. It was ODST was an organic side story, like a pretty sort of long-standing video game tradition of the Gaiden type story. And so that was obviously, because that was happening in parallel with development on Reach and the ending of Halo 3, it was deliberately designed to be this sort of offshoot story. Reach, on the other hand, was definitely going to be Bungie's last Halo game, and they knew that. So what they didn't want to do is start a trilogy or start an arc that required that someone else finish it, or that they couldn't finish in a timely fashion themselves. So they wanted to do something that was foundational, that set up the universe. And that's why it takes a prequel form, is because of what it does is literally introduce the Master Chief in its climax. That's probably a spoiler for some people.
But Bungie fully owned their creative, and again, like Frank said, it's Dan Ayub's team worked with them, and wherever they needed any of our assistance or support. But that's the story they wanted to tell. And again, I think ODST was just a nice opportunity to try and tell a different side story and kind of get more focus on different parts and characters in the universe.
Yeah, and I worked on the Reach story back when I was at Bungie for a long time, and it was definitely the team wanted to try something with an ensemble cast and a much more gritty, military-focused story rather than the big, enigmatic sci-fi that you kick off with in Halo 1. So it was a much more grounded story, about a much more personal story that they wanted to tell.
I was also curious, in kind of the same note, you guys talked about how you kind of looked at the whole lore as a whole and kind of wanted to make a kind of standardized thing. As far as I guess, was there ever a definitive period where Bungie kind of handed over the Halo figurative Bible, and I mean, I don't suppose you guys really at that point there's not really much communication there anymore, as far as you guys have Halo now, you've got all the notes, you're all set, and there's really no need to check with Bungie on things anymore.
No, and that's kind of I'm incredibly passionate about the universe, but it's a pretty daunting task to take over such an amazing franchise, and I wanted to be the right steward. And so, as Frank said, we hired this company called Starlight Runner that at the time was one of the only transmedia companies, and I was looking for someone that understood multiple mediums. And the first task was getting the Bible made. So we have, there are tons, obviously, for the 10 years of Halo assets, and both Bungie and we had access to that. But what I didn't have access to was, the hearts and minds of the creators. And so Starlight Runner came in and did a ton of interviews with, Bungie, including Frank, to hopefully, give us that base and that Bible. And the outward-facing results of that Bible was the DK Halo Encyclopedia, and then internally we have notebook after notebook of
intractable, dry nightmare of dates. And,
obviously the assets.
It's not fun. And what Starlight Runner was able to do was turn really, really dry pages and pages of documentation into something that you could quickly look at, no matter what your discipline is and what your interest in the Halo universe is. But yeah. And most of our stories have been kind of forward moving. So one of the ironies is, once this thing was done, it's really it's a race to catch up, to update it, because literally we still don't have everything that's in ODST back in the Bible yet, and Reach certainly not. We're ages behind on that. So it's a chronologically forward moving process, and every time we add a new story element, we have to update the Bible, and every time that we add a new piece of the universe, we have to expand that universe as it's recorded. But it's a fairly daunting but ultimately dry thing. Dusty tome is the...
We have it in a locker, and it's dusty pages.
Yeah,
it's not online or anything, because we want to be authentic.
Yeah, the stuff that's probably most interesting, but also most incomprehensible, is the sort of cliff notes of where do we go from here. And there's a lot of outward-looking thinking in there. It's what what is Halo 5 going to be about, for example, and how does the universe end, as Bonnie likes to say, what's the last story we ever tell? And there's some stuff in there that would be hair-raising for some fans, but probably pretty cool. But I dread going into it because it's such a giant.
Yeah, what was cool, like what was I think cool about the initial process, and I think Frank was really the one that pushed it. When we were talking about bounding the universe, Frank was the one that pushed, do we leave the Forerunner story a mystery? Because it's sprinkled, as you know, throughout all the games, but it is a mystery. Or do we really dive deeper on that mystery and open up that part of the world? And that was Frank's decision. And I'm excited that we decided to go that way, because it is really an exciting new world to look at. But that was a decision that Frank pretty much led.
I always thought about the Forerunners as this combination between ancient Egypt and Easter Island, whereas this enigma, what is all this stuff? And if you think about Egypt in particular, there was a point in human history that isn't so long ago. I mean, the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, where we literally had no idea who or what the ancient Egyptians were. We didn't know until they found the Rosetta Stone. All of the hieroglyphs are completely ambiguous. Now they can be read fairly trivially. And it's not like the ancient Egypt and ancient Egyptian culture became less interesting once we found out what was going on. And what it did was open up a whole new universe of mysteries about their culture and their traditions and their society and their interactions with other I almost said species, but other cultures in from ancient Rome to ancient Greece. And so they became infinitely more fascinating, and it was this huge untapped well of fiction for us, where we had the unusual step of having to go very, very far back in time, roughly 100,000 years for canonical purposes, but make very sort of human connections. And we did that. We worked with Greg Bear to kind of start that process. And his second book is due on my desk at the end of the week.
Ooh, exciting! That's really cool. I guess kind of just going forward, like chronologically with like 343. When did you guys decide? Obviously, Halo 4 was always the big goal, but when was the decision made to work on the Halo anniversary, like totally pump it up? And
yeah, that was a really hard decision, because when we started the studio, that was one of the #1 fan requests, and I initially said no, because I thought that was sort of almost sacrilegious to touch what I think is the quintessential, the best game of the franchise so far, and so I said no. And then when the 10-year, we started thinking about what we were going to do for the 10-year celebration, we kept getting a lot more requests from fans, and I think mainly just with how do we celebrate 10 years, we decided to move forward, but the entire studio was really apprehensive about us messing it up. Like, that's not the right thing, first thing for 343 to do. So it wasn't even until we have a green light process for things moving from prototype, and at that time you had the button to switch between old and new. And I know it's been huge with people that have seen it. It was the same thing with us. Then we kind of decided that whatever we do, we can't change the gameplay, because that is the most important thing. But what can we do to make it a deeper experience? And I hope we have delivered on that. It's pretty fun to play.
Yeah, because of the foundational work that Bungie did, obviously, it's right there in the game. Weirdly, the only thing we didn't have to worry about in the entire process was, will the campaign be fun?
Yeah.
Right? It was kind of pre-solved. Even if it had just been blocks and triangles, it still would have been a fun game because of the basic mechanics. So then the challenge became one of, what do we do to add to this experience in a way that isn't just, it couldn't just switch between old and new game, or just be an HD remake on its own. We had to do something that kind of celebrated what people liked about it and what people wanted added to it. So there's things like achievements and skulls and all those kinds of things, but I think the hardest part of the process was figuring out what to do with multiplayer. Because the original Halo CE multiplayer engine is awesome, and we get it. Like, we wish we could have done that too, but it's very antiquated technologically. It was kind of really a freebie spin-off of the campaign effort in the first place. Only worked on System Link. Didn't have a networking model as a result. It's kind of, if you remember Apple Talk's sort of simple peer-to-peer local networking, it was kind of like that. And so to recreate that experience accurately would have been a tremendous amount of effort. I mean, 2-3 years worth of, you know, grafting on a modern networking model. It's not like you can just take Reach and stick it on that code and make it work. It would have been years of testing and development. So we had to make a decision to get it done in a timely fashion. And we also fundamentally didn't want to say to the Reach fans, oh, we're going to interrupt your experience, decimate your population and your ecosystem because we have a new but old thing. And so we eventually made the decision to make the multiplayer engine run in the Reach engine and have them talk to each other pretty much seamlessly. But also knowing that there was going to be a lot of fuss about us not using the original Halo CE engine, and there's a lot of demand for that, and there still is. We made a decision that we could build a title update for the Reach code that would be able to add a lot of the classic behaviors and gameplay features, including the Halo pistol, and sort of give us the ability to through matchmaking, create very pure classic experiences that can live side by side with the conventional Reach gameplay. So it was a really hard decision, but if you'd been in the meetings, the math became more and more apparent that this is the right thing to do. And I think people at Halo Fest certainly tried the TU, tried the new maps, and seem to be really happy with where it's headed. So we're excited to launch that in September, then October, when it's implemented in matchmaking.
Awesome. Yeah, I certainly had a lot of fun with it. Why did you guys decide to? Was the decision made really early on to bring in outside studios, Saber Interactive and Certain Affinity?
In order to have an internal team and build an internal team from scratch to deliver a AAA experience, that had to be the main focus of the internal team. So anytime we made a decision to do something new, that falls under the publishing arm. And with Halo Anniversary, if we would have used our internal team, it just would have delayed whatever we were doing going forward. And you know, plus, what we found with Saber is it was a good marriage of being able to keep the old game exactly as it is and then work with their technology to kind of give us the additional graphics bump. So it was a good partnership for us, but it was always planned to do on the publishing arm.
And we were shopping around for a really specific set of skills and technology because of the nature of the project. We knew it was going to be core Halo gameplay, and we needed someone who had an interesting and compatible rendering solution, and Saber's graphics technology was kind of exactly what we were looking for. And in fact, it was very, I mean, it's so suitable that we eventually got something that used to be a menu item, the switching on the fly, is now in the game. And as we announced at Halo Fest, another benefit of that type of rendering process with the layering of the two engines effectively gave us a shot at having 3D for free without affecting performance or frame rate in any significant fashion. So 3D is something we probably wouldn't have spent an awful lot of time on were it not for the specific kind of rendering benefit that we got from that engine. And so it's a nice little feature, and it got a really positive reaction at Halo Fest. And I think that one of the reasons for that is Halo has these kind of fairly slow-moving projectiles and brightly colored projectiles compared to other shooting games, which have like hit scan instant bullets. So just the very nature of the combat is incredibly, almost exaggerated 3D effect, and we had people gasping when they were trying it. I normally can't see 3D very well, but Halo is the most, especially with my particular perception problem, one of the most impressive 3D games I've seen. So it's a cool little feature, not a big deal. I don't know what tiny percentage of our players will actually get to experience it, but it's nice to be able to throw in all that stuff into the package, especially at $40.
Yeah, and then I also want to make sure we call on the multiplayer, which is being done by Certain Affinity. That was a very deliberate choice as well. We partnered with Saber for what we felt was right for the campaign, and then CA is, a great. Yeah, they've been making
multiplayer maps for us in Bungie since Halo 2. So I mean, and there's a lot of ex-Bungie guys, so it's a very natural fit.
This seems to signal you 343's willingness to work with outside development and teams. Do you feel this is a philosophy going forward since Anniversary is going well?
Certainly for this kind of, I mean, we just think of it as a publishing project in a way, and Certain Affinity is specifically a kind of a different case because they in some ways feel like a right arm or an extension to our multiplayer effort because we have such a long, good, well-founded relationship with those guys. So it's a little bit different, but working with good partners, people like Ensemble and people like Saber, historically has been a big part of the Halo franchise, and that's how we think about all artists and contributors. So.
Yeah, and I would just say that, again, I think it's important, especially as a new studio, that we figure out what our core wheelhouse is and that we build that, and we do that with a single focus. And so if we were to say, think of a mobile game or something like that, I think it'd be really distracting, and I'm not saying we're doing a mobile game, but if we were thinking of that, for example, that's something, then that's why the publishing team is set up to basically support that. So yeah, if the right opportunities come up, I think it gives us a chance to do different things, but our main focus is the internal Halo 4
And
project.
that's kind of been true of the Halo franchise for a decade, honestly, because when we do big ad campaigns, they can sometimes become an event in themselves, like the Halo 3 Believe campaign and Deliver Hope campaign, and recently the Halo 4 trailer. We always go and work with people who are really good at doing that kind of thing. And we can make a CG trailer in-house and make that an ad, but we always find it's better to get artists who are good at a specific type of thing to do their best work and give them your universe as a framework for that. And we've had great experiences with that and great success with that for the last 10 years.
Obviously, the last several Halo entries have been on a yearly schedule, and that's obviously been set up again with Anniversary and 4. Do you see this kind of precedent continuing on? Is Halo a yearly franchise? Do you guys see that?
Not to say that, I mean, obviously, hopefully everything we're doing is deliberate. It wasn't set up to kind of, be an annual cadence. Sometimes products slip, and Halo Wars and Reach weren't exactly timed at where they originally started out at. So it kind of ended up being
crowded.
Yeah,
but I think, those are actually pretty happy experiences. I think that that was a good cadence for those products, and they all were pretty successful. Not as a result, I think just in terms of people's demand for new experiences and you have to have something every year, whether it's a map pack or a game or an experience, because there's demand for it. But we aren't deliberately setting up to create an annual factory. It's just going to be a case of what are our production schedules like, what is demand like, and what are the things that we're naturally fitting into that like.
Because just as an outsider, it seems like just a logical thing. Just guessing is like, you got Anniversary, you got Halo 4, then you got Halo 2 remake, then you got Halo 5. It just seems like a pattern that is a possibility. But
sure, it's a possibility, but right now there's no plans to make Halo 2, for example, so I hope it would fall down there already. But we're coming out of Halo Fest and coming out of Anniversary, people are like, when am I getting Halo 2? And we have to take that seriously as a company, so we're looking at it. We just don't know if it makes sense. Halo Anniversary was celebrating 10 years, and it was a really specific beat, and it was something we wanted to do for the fans. Halo 2, sure, there's demand for it, but we have to figure out if it's natural, if there's bandwidth to do it. And there's a Halo 2 map in Halo Anniversary. It wasn't, the maps were picked based on whether they'd been on the 360, whether they worked with Reach. We didn't sort of monolithically take pretty bad maps from Halo 1 and put them in there just for the sake of it. It was a very careful selection process.
Yeah, and again, I think that the feedback we got from Halo Fest is just like you're asking. There were a lot of requests for Halo 2. If we make a decision to do it, again, Halo 1 fit into the 10-year, I think it was the right thing to do. We just need to make sure that, one, it's what fans want, and that it fits in. But again, that's also why we have the publishing team, that we can move quickly if we decide to do something like that with other partners, and then keep the internal team focused on delivering our next big bet.
There's no way we'd fit something into an annual cadence if it was unnatural or if there was no demand for it. It just wouldn't make sense. It has to be logical, and timing has to be right. So.
Well, speaking of incorporating 3D and the classic Switch buttons, we've also heard about the Kinect functionality. Is this something you guys hope to be talking about soon? The actual ins and outs of it, like
for Anniversary?
Yes. Yeah, for Anniversary.
We'll probably talk more about it in the next month or two for sure. And it's not. We don't want to say it's trivial or irrelevant, but it's a small piece of the game and it's a cool little feature. But we don't want to overhype it. It's just a neat little added piece of fun and functionality that I think people with Kinect will definitely enjoy. I kind of, at this point with my Kinect at home, I kind of take it for granted that there's going to be some Kinect functionality that I'm interested in. I mean, I was playing a lot of Fruit Ninja at Halo Fest. I couldn't go past it without like smashing up some fruit. But I love Kinect for the different points of interaction it gives you. And like use Netflix and Zune as an example. That's what I do most of my TV watching on anyway. So just having voice control right off the bat for Zune and Netflix it's beyond convenient. It's created an all new monster of laziness that I never knew existed within me, and that's the kind of thing that I definitely look for, is like novel gameplay experiences, but also convenience. I mean, my Xbox now has this tool, and I kind of want to use it. So that's definitely philosophically the way we approached it. Halo is a controller-based shooter, and so is Halo 4 for that matter. And we have to. That's the core of the gameplay, not Kinect. Kinect is the core of Fruit Ninja's gameplay. It's the core of what's the name of the cool Sega survival horror game? You probably know better.
Rise of Night.
Yeah, like that's how it was designed. Designed to be used. But a controller-based FPS should be a controller-based FPS. So we're trying not to distract from that. But by the same token, we want this to be like a pretty cool compendium of features, as I said before. Give people something new while they celebrate the old.
I guess with during the panel, kind of more focused on Halo 4 a little bit, you talked about a lot of awesome like prototypes that the team has come up with for gameplay, functionality, and loops, and like the hard choice of kind of having to cut those. Do you see those like somehow surfacing in other future projects, or are they just gonna disappear forever?
I mean, some of them were just implementation ideas rather than necessarily inventions. But I mean, if something got cut from the game to this point, and ask me again in summer when we've had to cut features for time. If they've been cut as prototypes at this point, it's because they weren't exactly right. So the simple answer is not without changing, right? So it would be something different anyway. I don't want to give you an example because people would be like, why didn't you leave that in? Or thank God you left that out, right?
It was a full Kinect game.
Full Kinect, yeah, which is but yeah, they were things that were really cool on their own merits, but in some ways, it's like wearing a pair of shoes that's too big or too small, where they're cool shoes, but they're not right for you. And so they were things that felt wrong about. And I'd even say there's things in Halo Reach where people complain that it doesn't feel like a Halo game, or that, like armor lock breaks up the flow of combat, for example. And so it's things like that where they're really cool unto themselves, but sometimes they just don't feel exactly like a part of the flow and cadence and feel of a traditional Halo game. But the balance point there is, what do you do to add to that? What do you do to evolve and layer on new features and functionality and involve the game so that it's going forward, not just like resting on its laurels? So there's a tipping point between those things. So we have done some new stuff, and there will be some stuff that will even be controversial, because everything you do in Halo is controversial. We feel that they're definitely natural fits, and as we go through testing, as we go through play testing, people like can't live without some of the things that we have added. So,
well, speaking of controversy, with Halo 4, it's just that whole challenge of really just changing it all up, like and fan reaction, and the Bungie faithful and the people who just like Halo. Like, there's a lot to deal with there. How can you kind of explain your feelings on that?
I think that as Frank talked about, when we were building the studio, it's a daunting task to take over such an amazing franchise. And so I will say that people and everyone on the team are incredibly passionate about not letting the fans down. And we know we need to think about what is true to Halo, but we also need to take it forward, and fans want to take it forward. So I think it's something that everyone in the studio takes very seriously. And one of the reasons why we started out with a trilogy versus just saying, hey, let's try and move one step at a time, is I think if we don't think holistically and we don't think big for the universe, we're not going to strive to do the right thing for the franchise. We're here to make sure the next 10 years are as fulfilling as the first. And as such, a lot of the work that Frank has done on both the backstory and looking at the whole trilogy, arc for Master Chief has been pretty important for us, making sure that we're thinking for the long term, not just for the short term.
Yeah, and I think you can over-index on that. I mean, we're definitely going to be held to a different level of scrutiny by definitely the mainstream press don't care, but the hardcore gaming press will be talking about that and having that conversation. But you know, a team in a lot of ways is a ever-evolving beast. You know, the team that shipped Reach is not the same team that shipped Halo 1 and so on, right? So in some ways it's this virtual creation, and what you have to do is just anyone will tell you the same thing. You just have to focus on what you're doing and making it good, and not letting somewhat artificial externalities guide the direction that you take the game. So when we're being faithful to Halo, we're being faithful to Halo. We're not trying to pander to a specific type of fan or ignore a specific type of fan. We just have to keep our eyes on the ball. In this case, it's Halo, and so that's what the people in that room right now are doing. They're all focused on making a great Halo experience, and making a Halo experience that feels like a 2012 Halo experience, and something that the legions of fans that are already faithful to it will happily embrace. And I think we also have some benefits. I mentioned before, everyone in that room came here to work on Halo, and you can't even say that about an original team or a team that's creating a new franchise. They all came here to be a part of that universe and embrace that universe, so we're going to get some benefits from that. But we also have hindsight, right? And we had time to plan and a perspective to plan from. And you know, the Bungie team was always rolling on their next project and doing amazing work, but they never had the chance to sit back and look at it and say, what do we do next? It was always work, 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 work. So there's some slight advantages that we get, but you're right, it's a huge challenge, and nobody takes it lightly.
What I thought was interesting is I wasn't sure if this, looking at the address, I was like, oh, I wonder if they have new offices, or it was fun to see that it's in the building that Bungie formerly occupied.
Yeah.
And have you guys done any fun, interesting renovations, or kind of pretty similar?
It's
to what it was?
We painted it and fixed things that were broken and cleaned it up, but ultimately this space was custom designed to be a studio for building Halo games with a couple hundred people, and so there wasn't that much we really had to do, but we've definitely made it our own, and it feels like our own place. And it's it's like a cool house that you've coveted for a while, and you get to move in and put your own finishing touches to it. But it's a really nice, productive, big open space.
Yeah, I think the only major thing we did is fill in the pit.
Oh yeah, there used to be a sort of a beanbag pit, and we just floored over it to make some more dining space, really, for people to eat, watch games.
And then replace the toilets, as
we replaced
Frank
the
said in the
toilet.
panel.
Yeah, I think that was a hit at the
yeah, it's the front page of Wired, I think.
It's the main quote. Also, here's the name of the trilogy, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, getting the Hog in Forza 4 was big, the big announcement at Halo Fest. How did that whole arrangement come out?
I mean, we've done it before a couple of times, where we have a partner that we're particularly enamored with, right? And the last big one was Team Ninja with Dead or Alive, and they came and asked us if they could have a Spartan. And our natural instinct with these things is always no, right? We say no to so many different things, but every now and then something comes along that's an attractive nuisance, and it's something that we're, as a studio, passionate about. And we have so many car people in this studio. When Forza came and asked us, when it's interesting, I usually bubble it back to Bonnie and say, what do you think about this? It's, if they can respect what it is about your property that's cool, and treat it in a really interesting and exciting manner, then sometimes it's definitely worth doing. And it's nice to have partnerships like that with Microsoft Studios. But the Hog was great because we'd actually just finished building the new Hog model. And the Forza version's based on our 3D assets and our textures and stuff. They've obviously massively increased the resolution for that Auto Vista experience. But that's our Hog, and we kind of wanted to see it. We, as gamers and driving fans, we kind of wanted to see it. And Alan Hartman had, when he spoke about it, he was saying that we want to do something really authentic to Halo. You don't have to drive it, so don't worry about the fact that it only goes at 78 miles an hour, which is true. So it would be slower than the Miata that you start out with, or the Suzuki Cappuccino, or whatever you got. But they wanted to do something with the fiction, and so we talked to them about having the Cortana narration, and we were actually able to tell a story with it. So there's some really cool story beats in this crazy, good-looking, shiny new Warthog, and it also helps us link fans to Halo 4 in a really sort of out-of-the-box fashion. So that one was nice, and it wasn't easy. There's a lot of work on both sides. The Forza guys slaved over that thing, and our guys had to do a lot of work to get it to that stage. But it was really fun to see it finished.
Yeah, I think they did a great job, and you know, for our team, I think it was really nice to see something like we're not going to see something near final polish for a while in our game, and I think it was a great thing for the studio also to see some of their work looking super nice a year early, which is cool. They did a really nice job.
Well, even though the Warthog is kind of slow, a lot of comments on our news story. Everyone wants to give it a drive. I mean, like a custom course or something.
I think that the other car manufacturers would be pretty upset if you just blasted them to shrapnel at the start line while everyone's revving their engines. Yeah, it was. Yeah, maybe one day.
Well, speaking of companies coming to ask for getting a chief or somebody in the game, Mortal Kombat PlayStation users had like awesome Kratos bonus character. Did the MK people ever come and ask for Master Chief? Or,
a fighting game company did ask for Master Chief recently, but fundamentally, because we'd done it with DOA already, it would have been not only redundant, but they would have had to. When we worked with the DOA guys, we actually created a fighting style around Spartans that was kind of based on some of the fiction and a little sort of blend of Krav Maga and MMA style fighting, very practical, brutal sort of combat form. So we would have either had to stick with that fiction and force it into their game, which wasn't necessarily built to accommodate that fighting style, or skip the opportunity. I always feel bad when it's a cool project, but we declined that opportunity just because of the DOA thing that already existed. So, but I mean, if they ever did another DOA game, obviously it would make a little bit more sense to see if that was a recurring character and something you could build upon. But that was one of the reasons we demurred on this particular opportunity.
You guys have spoken about the terminal side stories in Halo Anniversary. To kind of go deeper into things, are those kind of more to flesh out the story of Halo 1, or are they going to drop hints towards 4, or just another story altogether? Or what's the general tone and goal with those?
All of that.
Everything.
Literally. So it's actually, the terminals in Halo Anniversary are actually a really interesting tipping point. I think if you don't know anything about Halo, it's just a really cool story about this fairly lonely, tragic character, and it's really interesting unto itself. But if you're a Halo fan, it gives a lot of context to things that happen in Halo. I mean, Guilty Spark says a lot of really weirdly enigmatic things, and some of it is absolutely attributable to the fact that he's crazy because he's been on a ring for 100,000 years. But he's actually going to do some things in this story that will make a couple of things he said go, he actually did mean something by that, and this does have a connection with the. And so it'll give you some background information on the Halos itself and a little bit about Forerunner culture and technology. But also there's some hints, lots of connections with Greg Bear books, and those will become more apparent in the future. But a couple of little connection points with Halo 4 as well. So we used it as a kind of crossroads for a lot of stories, but made sure it was a really cool self-contained story in itself.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you guys taking some time to talk to us today. It's been great to learn more about Halo and where it's going. Thank you very much.
Thank you.